I'm audible, right?
You're good.
Thank you. Okay. Starting in three, two, one. I would like to start with four reasons as to why this policy is likely to be massively politically unpopular, irrespective of whether this policy is successful or not. The first reason as to why this is likely the case is that now you are likely to give leverage and become dependent on the US military in order to be conducting your own sovereign operations. This is likely to be seen as massively harmful, especially towards the electorate that elected you as a left-leaning president, which was lower and middle-class people, which are currently devastated by the ongoing trade and tariffs war, which means those people feel like you appear weaker and will not be able to have leverage and negotiate on their particular behalf. The second reason is that those people, even if they can rationally understand the benefit of this particular policy, have been massively hurt by the protectionist policies of Donald Trump. Currently, as we're speaking, Donald Trump has imposed an ongoing 30% tariffs on many Mexican businesses. This includes lower end manufacturing, agriculture, and other sectors, which means those businesses have been massively devastated, which means there is a large number of people whose salaries have slimmed down, who are currently unemployed by as a result of Trump's policies, which means there is a huge retributional, purely emotional need for you to be retaliating and appearing as a strong person relative to cooperating and succeeding to the demands of Donald Trump. The third reason as to why people are massively skeptical and are likely to have a negative reaction towards cooperation with America in right now, especially right now, is that America has very much tightened their control over their borders in terms of migrants that are currently going within the country. So right now on the Mexican border, there is a huge crisis where many migrants from Central America are passing through Mexico. They're unable to go to America and they are stuck at Mexico, which means there is a significant financial burden and a significant burden upon the welfare state, which means there is a higher increase in crime, higher spending to house those illegal migrants, which is a burden for Mexicans, which is why they hugely hate America right now. So any association with America that is consensual in nature is likely to be perceived massively negatively because Donald Trump is hugely unpopular in Mexico. The fourth reason as to why this is likely to be seen as politically unpopular is simply because it shows a massive amount of weakness. At the point in which you accept external support, you are admitting that you cannot do it on your own. You are also feeding into many conspiracy narratives that you as a president are a puppet of the US and you're just doing whatever they want, which means you are likely to lose support from many patriotic people that care above all else about the sovereignty of Mexico, irrespective of practical immediate outcomes in that particular regard. Fifthly, you are likely to become hugely unpopular with the military of Mexico because you are admitting that they have not done a good job insofar and they're not capable of handling their job on their own, or they feel threatened that there will be defunding efforts by your administration if you become more reliant on the US, which means that they're going to actively be protesting against you, or they're less likely to vote for you in the next electional cycle. Those reasons are independent of the clash of effectiveness, but I plan to win that as well. Second point of constructive, why this policy will not be successful. And I would just like to flag the importance of this particular clash, because any benefit that you can claim as a political victory for this controversial policy is you being able to show that there are tangible changes in the lives of the average person that can justify why this policy was imposed to begin with, because there are many inherent harms, as I have already proven, optically in terms of the loss of sovereignty, optically in terms of the dependence, optically in terms of the fact that you are not retributing but you're cooperating. Five reasons as to why this policy will not be successful. The first and most obvious reason is that cartels, if they feel existentially threatened by the powerful US military, have a common incentive to unite together and to stop fighting with one another so they can defeat the common threat. That is to say, if there is an external threat, you unite with your enemies so you can remove it, and then you go on with your cooperations, with your peace, or with your mini cartel wars, which means even if you can individually take one cartel down, they have a mutual incentive to protect one another because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or whatever is the saying. If one of them falls down, this means that you may be next. So you want to protect every single one in that particular way. The second reason as to why they're likely to be successful to fight back is, I just want to do a quick reality check. They also have bazookas. They also have drones. They also have snipers. Those cartels are literally worth in the billions for two reasons. The first one is there is a massive amount of domestic supply of drugs that they're selling to the US. And the second one is that they are the gateway between Central America, where the other drug cartels are, and America, which means they charge massive tariffs and fees for those businesses to safely go and pass through their country, which means they're literally worth in the billions. They have private militias. They hire foreign mercenaries. They also have the latest technology. This is not a debate about a technologically more superior side compared to the cartels. The third reason as to why they are likely to be able to survive in that particular regard is because they're very decentralized in nature. They've already have a long history of fighting with the Mexican state and waging mini civil wars, for example, in 2006 and in 2012, which means they are seasoned veterans in fighting, not only with the Mexican military, but also amongst themselves, which means that they're not lacking in any military experience, and they conveniently decentralize their infrastructure. So if you capture one route, they have 20 or 27 others. If you capture one leader, they have contingency plans, and they have 7 other leaders that are willing to replace them. So you can never cripple them, and they always have an incentive to hide among civilian populations in order to make it harder for you to do deadly strikes, because that would be hugely politically unpopular. The fourth reason as to why they're likely to be not likely to be eliminated is that in many cases, as OG themselves admit, there is local corruption on the ground by mayors and other political figures locally or regionally, which means they can give them tips and information on attacks that are likely to happen. If they have the police and the local politicians on their hand, they can prevent the most deadly strikes against them, which means the leaders survive and they survive as an open. Before I continue, closing.
What
Okay, I tried to take the
to be a left-wing politician in Mexico?
To support the people, basically to support the people. You're already doing a lot of progressive policies by giving people money on the ground, expanding social services and stuff like that. But if people are going to die, this isn't seen as very progressive. The final reason as to why this is not likely to be effective is those cartels actually have a lot of support on the ground. They de facto control certain regions of Mexico unofficially. They buy out businesses and provide local employment for people for 3 reasons. The first one is they want to diversify their sources of income, so they buy many franchises and small businesses. B, they want a legal way to get legal amounts of money because they cannot rely on dirty dollars alone. Or 3, they want to have a good opinion because if they need employees, they want the people to willingly join their operation. So they want a general good image with the local population. Or C, they don't want the local population to snitch on them. So in many cases, they're not that horrible in many instances. There may be instances of abuse, but they're not as widespread as opening government is willing to claim. What are the implications of this? This policy, if it is a massive failure, is likely to be hugely political and popular. Secondly, the civilians that are likely to die as a result of those casualties is blood on your hands that is going to be weaponized against you and will hold you down with guilt and shame for what you have done because you have directly initiated this. So on all those grounds, oppose.
Thank you, Elo, for that fine speech. I call upon the DPM to continue the case for OG.
All right, assuming that I'm audible.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Oh, and I'll take PRs in the chat, thanks. All of the reasons they give you in that LO speech as to why this would not be effective are totally symmetric. They do not explain why any of those disadvantages that you have in fighting, these cartels who are so strong are things that disproportionately apply to US troops as opposed to Mexican troops. In which case, what I would suggest to you, as Dhruv does at first, is just that having more people to ensure that people on the ground living in Mexico are safe is just the best way that you are able to meaningfully improve people's lives. Having an extra police officer around to help support you is actually just something that helps. And that is what we've seen in Mexico. The largest amount of decrease in cartel violence has occurred in Mexico City, where there has been the largest increase in deployment of troops, of police and stuff like that. Having more boots on the ground is better in that way, especially when they are curtailed by the fact that they are controlled by the Mexican government, by the deal that you make with the US that puts them within Mexican troops, that already are existing there, that contain them within the existing policies around this. Any decrease in violence improves people's lives and shows that you are strong, not that you are weak. Let's first deal with why you are more popular by this, flipping their claim, and then why this is the most effective, because I think that we already decisively win on that. Let's start though then why this is popular. They tell you it's going to be unpopular because now you're seen as dependent on the US, and people are really angry at Trump's policy of tariffs because they have been harmed by those tariffs, so they want to retaliate against you. But what this proves to you is why Dhruv's second argument is uniquely debate winning there, and why getting rid of US protectionism against you is the unique extra way that we win this debate. Because what I would note here is that if you believe this demographic cares so much about tariffs and the devastation they are wreaking on their lives, you ought to believe they want to see it removed. How do we get rid of these tariffs, and how do we get rid of the border issues that they also tell you are important? Obviously, Trump is able to present this as a win for the US. He is able to say that he has done something to try to, help the deal, the fentanyl crisis, to deal with the cartel issue that he has literally campaigned upon. And that allows him to be more concessionary towards you. He wants to look like he can be a good partner sometimes before he alienates even more people in the world. This is the means by which he's able to do things like decrease tariffs to be better towards you. But equally, it just gives him the latitude to do so. Currently, people in the US who are his voter base are afraid of fentanyl. They are afraid of cartels and things coming across the border. But this is the chip that is able to be used to decrease that level of fear and therefore legitimize a lessened, policy of aggression towards Mexico. So he's more likely to be better there. But even if you didn't believe he was going to be much better, I was just in their world, he gets worse and worse over time. And that is because Trump is pissed when you do not allow him to do what he wants to do. But this gets worse over time because the fentanyl crisis will probably get worse. There will continue to be gangs. And so there will continue to be voter pressure onto him to deal with this as he tries to retain his power. But now what Trump tries to do is he tries to coerce you into accepting this deal into the future, which means he increases the tariffs that he puts onto you. He worsens the treatment of people at the border and cracks down on the immigration that is occurring, which makes all of that worse. And it makes you look incredibly bad to this voter base that they tell you care about these the most. So they lose on their own metric. But equally, Trump would then stop as well his current support that he's giving you in dealing with cartel violence. He stops giving you the resources he currently gives you. He stops giving you the surveillance. So you as a government get worse at dealing with this crisis in your own country, which means not only do you look bad on tariffs, you look bad on cartels as well, because you're dealing with them gets worse over time and you lose voters that you got on that issue as well. So you're less popular and your country is worse off. The next reason they give you as to why you're less popular is essentially you look weak, it's imperial. But I would suggest a flip of this, which is this actually takes away right-wing platforms into the future for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it shows that you are willing to compromise to get important stuff done. And that just takes away the wind in any populist right-wing sails that could emerge, because you're seen as someone who is relatively reasonable, who will cooperate across the lines, even with people like Trump. But secondly, as Dhruv explains, it removes the easy, I would have done better, that any competitor can run against you at the next election. Because, let's face it, Mexico is not going to get cartels in line before the next election, which means it will be an electoral issue in the next election. And if your opponent can say, well, you passed up an easy offer because you hate right-wing people, that is obviously an easy way that they can get people in the middle to come over towards them if they say they would have taken this up. So that's terrible for you with this. But next, I would say you can just present this in ways that look particularly good for you. You control the narrative, the point at which you decide this policy, which just means it should at least mitigate any large claims that they have left. The last thing I would do, though, is just to challenge that it is unpopular to be seen as being tough on gangs. And this is what we explain. People do not like cartels when they literally disrupt their livelihoods. This is something that is an important electoral issue. And so I think that you ought to believe this is important. Last, then, their claim is that the military will not like this because they feel like they are being undermined by US intervention. Firstly, this Mexican military already gets US military help, even if it is not in the form of troops. So I'm unclear what the tipping point is here. Secondly, we told you that we would give Mexican military generals and stuff control control over the way that US troops are deployed and, integrate them in. So they actually feel more powerful. Yay. But also, the better they do at doing this, the more the public likes them. So it's actually just a win-win for the military. At the end of this, we help you to be more popular, but also we just help people on the ground, both in terms of tariffs, but also in terms of cartels, and we get you better electoral outcomes in terms of stealing different voter bases. I'll take a POI from closing.
Trump has shown absolutely no consistency with his tariff policies. He's gone back and forth on them at least 4 times. How is that your big consequence of not doing this?
It's not our only big consequence. We give you a whole bunch of them. But what you can be sure of is that at least in the short term, he is likely to be pissed off at this. This is literally what Trump has shown us. He is irritable. He does do things stupid in the moment, and this is likely to just be one where he does that. Next, let's explain why this is incredibly effective. As I note in my intro, the reason they give you as to why it's not effective, things like cartels being powerful on the ground, things like corruption, things like greater knowledge, are things that are symmetric and explain why cartels are just difficult to crack down on. So you ought to believe the reasons we give you as to why it is particularly good if you just have more intel, more resources, and more troops you're able to use against this. But equally, we explain to you why even if this fails, you blame it on the US in our world, which insulates you from any harm, whereas in their side, you are blamed for it, which is obviously worse for you. But I also would suggest that there are worse possibilities in their side for the way that this plays out, because I think there are 2 options for what happens if you turn Trump down. Firstly, Trump gets fed up and he does unsanctioned interventions instead. Maybe he sends troops across your border. Maybe he does things like send in drones that attack your civilians. That is substantially worse. Secondarily, maybe you lose power in the future and a right-wing person gets into power and they accept this deal with Trump, and then you have no control over the terms that get implemented, and maybe they do this in much worse ways that are violent towards your own people. That is something you obviously want to avoid. So it's better to be able to set the terms now. Last, though, preemptively, maybe they're going to say US troops do this in a bad way. What we explain to you is that this is your unique opportunity to be able to control the way that this happens. Less violence in Mexico is a livelihood saved. It is a life saved. It is a child able to be raised with more money because their business can function because cartels are not threatening their customer base. So proud to propose.
I thank DPM for that fine speech, and I call upon DLO to close off a wonderful top half.
Hi. PY is in chat. I will take one from closing, and I will start in just a sec. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Let's be very clear about who our actor is and how she managed to get into power. This is a person who is pro-abortion, pro-LGBTQ rights, who wants to expand welfare, and who has won the election by literally succumbing lower middle class and poor people because she wants to expand welfare benefits and helping the economy grow. Let's be very clear. We all agree what are also the incentives and what she cares about in terms of re-election, because if we assume that OG says how she cares about the country, her being able to help the country means that she needs to get re-elected. This is our most proximate incentive. But also her safety and her not being threatened immediately is something we need to take into consideration. We'll prove also why this is something that's problematic. A few burdens that I want to talk about. Firstly, on how this is done alternatively, because what OG says, but your side is not much better. What they say, their major reason of what, why the alternative is not good is, it hasn't worked so far. She has been elected for less than a year, people. Let's give her some fucking time. But more structurally, a few things to say. One, they OGs themselves say that the problem of cartels is super embedded within the culture and within the economies of local and rural areas. What does this mean? The change has to go from bottom up. What does this look like, and what is she already doing that has to take some time to get into effect? One, she's actively making income policy to stimulate regions in order to be able to create jobs so poor people are not forced to go into cartels to make a living, but rather be able to have a normal person job. Secondly, she's actively centralizing centralizing police in the way of holding corrupt police officers accountable, because the major way of how cartels work is that they corrupt police officers and politicians in order to be able to do what the hell they want. And third of all, it's about freezing financial assets. Cartels cannot move or develop or trade in any capacity without centralizing, without their money and their assets, which is something that has been very effective, especially in Colombia, which is something that you don't need police troops to do, and it's something that you do on a central level. What this means is you fight against cartels, you are able to bring change, but you're not going full on war, which is why it's not the same with what they say, because you're able to get change without jeopardizing, actively arguing, and also being very can we say the US sending their troops is a very public thing. The way you tackle cartels is doing it behind closed doors and without them knowing. The moment you send troops to the Mexican soil, everybody knows. And what Biser tells you is that cartels are more likely to consolidate and unite for themselves because they are under active threat and they know it. It's much better to do it behind closed doors. Now, why is this also not done on your own terms, as OG says? Because Trump is just not the actor that they portray him to be. Firstly, note, the 30% tariffs that he's imposing right now, it's very clearly stated that he's because of the fentanyl crisis. It's actively something because of how Mexico is handling their drug policy, which means the moment you accept to send US troops on the ground, you are succumbing to the literal blackmail that is done through tariffs. And this has been Trump's whole policy so far, where the moment he doesn't like something within a country, he just puts a bigger tariff, and then they have to agree because they can't handle this economically. What's the problem with this is that they say, you say where to put people and how it's done because it's Mexico and you know your stuff. But the problem is the moment the tariffs Trump doesn't agree with you what you're doing, he'll just put a bigger tariff on you again because you need to succumb and agree on that. Because why can they do that? Because they're a bigger economy and they have the leverage in this point, and you already succumb to them. So it's like they have the upper hand on that. Second of all, why this is just not something even in the best case would turn out to be good. In the long term, I would take, before I engage constructively with everything, I would be a very nice person and say, best case scenario, OG are right, you get some good benefits. Why is this not good enough? One, this is just not something you can sustain long term. What Trump cares about is getting victory and making this flashy, which is something that they have to do in a bad way. Why? You want to kill, for example, very prominent leader of cartels. You want to do flashy stuff and dismantle them in order to be able to take it as your own political victory. Why is this bad? Because it's just not effective. Cartels are super intertwined. They have multiple levels of accountability, which means the moment you kill off the cartel leader, another one comes up. Or secondly, demand for drugs is inelastic because people are addicted and they want to get those drugs, which means the moment, for example, best case, you remove one cartel, another one forms, first of all, or second of all, some of the other 100 ones takes place and it expands their operation, just takes your drugs and demands that you were fulfilling. So no, even if you manage to get this done, it will not be something that long-term sustains you. What you need to do is not be dependent on the US and do your own policy on the ground, bottom up, that you're able to eradicate corruption step by step. And third of all, honestly, Trump is not going to keep those troops long term. Like the moment he has them there, he gets the victory, he gets to say he did it. After 1 year, he's done. The problem is all the dependency that you created on them is not going to be able to be eradicated, and you will not be able to do your policy better. Then why is this also not effective from other reasons? One, people are just not going to cooperate with you if you're an American police officer. What Biser explains to you are very reasons of why people do not trust the US, because of their deportation policy, because of the tariffs, because of all these other reasons, which means when you, even if you have people on the ground, it's just not gonna work, because the way you eradicate cartels is getting intel and being able to find the information, right? But you cannot get intel if you don't crack if you don't convince the person on the ground on the lower levels to cooperate with you, and they're just not gonna do it. So it doesn't matter if you have more people on the ground if you can't use it. Closing.
Yes, you didn't go full on war, and you didn't take Trump's deal. The right would love to play on this sentiment inside the country and be elected.
But the right is gonna hate on you more if you actively accept Trump's pressure and you back down to it, and you're seen as a pussy because you're not able to handle your own country and your own sovereignty. So sorry, the opposition is always gonna hate on you. This is just making it worse. Lastly, why is this something that in general is gonna create huge more harms? One, as we said, cartels have an incentive to unite the moment they see that they're under such an active military threat, which means, one, they're going to hide in civilian areas where there's less likely for you to kill them. And what this means that if the US troops have to do something, they're going to have to kill civilians. And we've seen this time and time again. It's something that is empirically true. Why is this the most important impact within the round? One, people dying is something that's actively weaponized against you, and it's something that's very prominent and easy to weaponize. Second of all, even if you're able to get some benefits on how you tackle cartels, these benefits are going to come in later. It's something that you as a politician probably are not going to be able to live to see and to get to see for your victory. But people dying happens immediately. It's something that immediately is going to get you out of power rather than the speculative benefits you get from your policy. What this means is that this actively poses a threat for you being able to do your job as a politician. It actively means it's not going to be effective because of the reasons we've outlined. And worst of all, people are going to die no matter what. And this is the most certain impact within the round.
I thank you, Dilo, for that fine speech and everyone for a wonderful top half. I call the member of government to open the case for back half. Hear, hear.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Amazing. One sec. Okay. Put my timer. Where's my phone annoying? Okay, amazing. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Time and time again, the left in Mexico has suffered great defeat and disappointment. Each year, throughout the years, the government, the right-wing government, was incredibly unpopular. It was popular opinion that they are corrupt, that they are mishandling the economy, and that overall they're doing a very bad job. And yet, each time when election time came, the right wing won. Because the people in Mexico thought that even though the left wing is maybe less corrupt and has good idea, they cannot afford themselves a left-wing government, because the rhetoric in Mexico for the last 2 decades is only the right-wing parties will be tough enough on cartels. OG said something about how political opponents can hold it over you if you don't do it. But that's not the whole picture, and that's also probably true if it goes badly, right? Only we will explain to you how this is crucial specifically, not just for you getting re-elected again, but for the left in Mexico having a stable political future as a whole, which you probably care about the most if you devoted your whole life to being in the opposition party that didn't have that much chance to be in power in Mexico. One quick rebuttal before I dive into why Sheinbaum knows that the only way to ensure a political future for the left wing in Mexico is to say yes to this opportunity. We hear from OO, no, you'll be seen as a pussy and the right wing voters are going to go for you. Please notice that this would have been true if the right-wing voter in Mexico would have cared more about nationalism than they care about cartels and organized crimes. We just believe that factually, because organized crimes and being tough on cartels is such a big issue in Mexico, it is not necessarily true, and the opposite is true. Let's get into the actual case. First of all, let's paint a picture of the Mexican political sphere and understand how it looks. Cartel and organized crime is the topic that decides who wins election and is the thing that guides most people on who they vote for, right? AKA not economic prosperity, not social justice, but this specifically, the question of who do you believe will be tough on organized crime. Why is that true? A couple of reasons. Firstly, people are driven by fear, right? When they open their television and they see on news more and more crimes happening, when they are afraid that their child will die because of a shootout between 2 gangs, when they hear about those things happening in their neighborhoods and in their cities all of the time, it is something that they feel like they cannot just let continue happening. Secondly, it's just genuinely a huge issue that it's very prevalent in their minds, right? But thirdly, people often vote based on feelings and intuition. The average person, especially in countries where democratic participation is low and people are disengaged from politics because they don't trust it, people don't have time to deep dive especially into what exactly the different parties are saying to them, right? Economics is something a lot more complex. A lot of the time, both sides are saying something that sounds I don't know, theoretically good, right? No one is saying let's fuck over the people and the other side is saying let's give them money. A lot of the time it's something that you're not sure who you should pick. So what you go with is what resonates with you more on an emotional level. And what resonates with you the most when you see your people suffering for years now because of cartel violence is the person saying, we will show them. And when you hear a right-wing person saying, I'm sorry, you cannot elect the left wing because they will be soft on cartels and everything will be so much worse, you believe them because you are afraid. And please notice that the political party who is deemed more hard on cartels is historically the right-wing party, right? A, because it's just factually the case, but let's give a bit of analysis anyway, in case you don't buy it. First of all, a much bigger focus of their campaign and of right-wing political parties in general is usually being more tough on crime and being more tough on things in general, right? While left-wing politics are usually a lot more about kind of giving, about how can we develop a certain region, a lot of the time right-wing in Latin America is a lot more about how do we make more rule of law, how do we use more powerful tools against crimes. Secondly, in general, right-wing politics have a more violent, decisive rhetoric, right? So when you're saying we're going to show them crime bosses, what's up? They don't talk like that, I'm sorry. But when you say something like that, then obviously you sound a lot more persuasive, and it happens less in the left wing. But thirdly, factually, it just has been used as a very powerful tool to fearmonger against the left in Mexico specifically. The impact is that for years, right-wing governments were elected even though they were in all other metrics shitty once and once again. This election, her being elected, is an historic moment and an historic opportunity that is breaking the right-wing dominance that has not been broken for years in the Mexican government. All of that goes to shit if you say no to what Trump is saying to you now. Why? Because saying no will necessarily look or be painted like you being soft on cartels, no matter if this will work or won't work. Before I get into why, yes.
Even if there is an abstract perception of being marginally soft on cartels, the most proximate thing in the minds of an irrational voter is 15 children died yesterday, and it was directly because of you, which means they live in fear and they vote against you.
We think that a great example to why that's not true is actually El Salvador, right? We see that in El Salvador, many people actually died because of the police brutality of El Salvador government, and still the government got elected once again because they're so fucking fed up with children dying because of drug cartels that they're okay with having a few losses. Why is it so bad if you say no, and why does it look so bad? Firstly, because people have confirmation bias, right? When they are skeptical about you for something, when they are afraid and have this fear planted in their mind that maybe I made a mistake, maybe they will be soft on crime, then you actively look for it and you will find it whenever you do it. Secondly, unfortunately for Claudia, she's a woman, and I'm sorry, but it is so often that the criticism that you get for women politicians is specifically she is too soft. She cannot have the hard decisions, which also makes it look a lot worse. Thirdly, obviously, the right wing will try to ride on it and paint it that way. On the comparative, if you say yes, you disprove the skepticism towards you and your party. Very clearly, you show that you're not only committed to fighting the cartels, but that you're even more committed and taking more drastic action that was taken by your right-wing predecessors. Whether it will be successful or not, you can easily use it to your advantage when you're campaigning, and the right wing cannot actually use it to their advantage even if it goes badly, because, well, again, being tough on crime and doing all of these super violent things against the cartel, sure, maybe not from the US government, is the whole agenda, and they can't exactly start talking about how bad it is and how you should be a pacifist. Why does that matter a lot more than everything else? First of all, it's a lot more long-term. Trump has only one term left, and we're talking here about the whole future of the left-wing party. But secondly, we think that she just cares about this more than she cares about cartels. For all of those reasons, please us.
I thank the member of government for that fine speech, and I call upon the member of Op to open the case for Op bench. See you, even.
Thank you. POIs in the chat, please. The call is looking a bit lonely, so if anybody wants to turn their video on, I'd love it, but it's okay if you guys don't. Okay, starting in just a moment. So I think the reason that CG is going to suffer here is because I don't think they've actually done their matter prep on Mexico, because a lot of their argumentation rests on the assumption that the right wing is a potent and meaningful threat in Mexico. Let's give a few responses to this. First of all, Sheinbaum holds a massive margin of victory over any center-right party in Mexico. It's not close. There's no meaningful right-wing opposition that can suddenly organize and be valorized as a consequence of this. Secondly, Mexico hasn't had a right-wing government in this century. Like the past 25 years have either been strongly leftist or center-leftist parties. So again, the notion that there is a right-wing that is waiting in the wings to come out because you're not sufficiently tough on crime, it's just not true. We're trying to borrow like idioms from other countries here that just don't apply. Thirdly, over 70% of Mexicans hold strongly negative views of the United States. So cooperation with the US, as identified earlier, doesn't work. Fourthly, this is just neglecting the political idiom of Latin America and the sorts of discussions that happen there, because Latin and Central America are regions which have a long history of US meddling and intervention and are strongly opposed to and resistant to it in the modern day. So all these ideas about being politically outflanked just don't hold. The other claim that CG tries to make is that the cartel issue decides who wins elections. I don't agree with this, but to the extent that it's true, I think this is something that all teams in Iran have kind of missed up, because we're succeeding, like we're winning the war against the cartels. There's two clear indications of this. Firstly, fentanyl overdose deaths have significantly dropped in the past several years. Like the fact that Trump is making a deal out of this does not mean that this is still a real non-solving problem. Like the intelligence sharing and the work that is being done is actively cutting into cartels in a much more successful way than a violent military operation would. And like example of this, like the second reason is that like 10 ringleaders were recently rounded up, cartels, and extradited to the US. So it's very clear that like we're working, it's working. We don't need to rush things and make them happen. So even if the cartel issue decides things, like they're doing pretty well over there. Broadly, the way we're going to talk about this debate from closing opposition is to note that I think opening opposition is largely fair and correct in saying that one, this won't work, and that this policy, independent of all of its consequences, is going to be unpopular. That's very true. However, we're going to go one step further and we're going to talk about why it's also going to cause incredible damage to Mexico. So not just that it's not going to work or that it's unpopular, but that it is actively going to create harms. And then I'm going to identify for you why those harms, and obviously the political baggage that they carry, outweighs everything that's been discussed in terms of like, we look kind of dependent or we're working with somebody we don't like. The harms are going to massively outweigh this. So the question then we're going to be answering is, how exactly is the on-ground operation going to go? And I'm going to make a pretty simple claim. I think it's going to be full of indiscriminate violence, possible war crimes, slaughter, possibly even sexual violence. I'm going to give 4 reasons for this. I think the US military, once it gets its feet into another country, does not behave very well. First, before that, though, I want to engage with opening government's potential shield against this, where they try to say, well, the Mexican government will get to decide how and where and in what form the US military is deployed. Several responses. First of all, even if we somehow had control over troop movements, we don't have control over troop behavior, which means that when they're actually engaged in combat ops, you cannot control them from doing indiscriminate violence. Secondly, like, why would the US agree to this? Like, why would the US agree to be the junior partner? The US, for example, helped Pakistan fight terrorism in Pakistan, but that didn't stop the US raining down drones and killing innocent Pakistani civilians in spite of the protestations of the Pakistani government. Mexico doesn't have bargaining power here, especially if you use Gov's own analysis, which is if you don't do this, Trump will punish you. Yes, well, the same applies, right? There's a slippery slope here. If you let Trump bring army into Mexico and then you don't do what he wants, then Trump can still punish you. So the tariff point is actually kind of silly over here. But on top of that, I also just want to note that like once the genie is out of the bottle, there's nothing you can do about it. The military is now in your country, and what are you going to do? Now, 4 reasons why US soldiers are going to behave awfully. The first one is just empirical basis. Look at the history of American intervention across the Middle East and Latin America. It is a history of slaughter, rape, pillage, football played with the heads of decapitated enemies. Militants are identified as people who are aged 15 or older and are men. Like, this is one of the most immoral armies in its interventions in the world. I see no reason to believe it's going to behave well. Secondly, there's reasons it's also likely to be indiscriminate, which is it's fighting in a low intelligence environment and it cannot differentiate a cartel member from a non-cartel member, which means to err on the side of caution, US soldiers are likely to commit mass slaughter and kill more people than they would have otherwise. Thirdly, it is also a deeply racist army. Remember that the United States Army is banned to some degree by left wings within the US, which means its recruitment overwhelmingly derives from wide-eyed nationalist right-wing kids, often Republicans, and they have a long-term hatred of Latinos, fed by the propaganda around the fentanyl crisis, fed by the propaganda around immigration. They're going to be very happy to be trigger happy because on some level, Mexicans and brown-skinned people are dehumanized for members of the US Army. Fourthly, they have a sense of impunity. The US is not worried about being tried for war crimes. They have the Hague Invasion Act. Like, if anybody was ever to try to hold the US accountable, their official stance on it is, we'll invade you. So the American military and its infantrymen feel a sense of immunity for war crimes, which informs how they behave in all theaters. Before I go on, I'll take OG.
Maybe you believe that economic development is the best thing to fight cartels, but on OG, we helped to remove tariffs and we decreased the amount of GDP you have to spend fighting cartels by yourself. So you can spend more on left-wing causes and help to develop your economy. Isn't that good?
I'm glad you got your case back in there, but the fact is I could concede to every single thing you've said, and the fact that the Americans are going to carry out war crimes is going to outweigh it in every possible metric, so I don't care. Right, going on. The other thing that OG tries to say to defend against this is it's such overwhelming force that there won't even be a fight. This is how they try to avoid the harms of conflict. I remember when the Viet Cong laid down its arms and surrendered. I remember when Al-Qaeda decided, guys, we don't have the sauce for this. Like, this is not how wars work. People fight, and OO has identified that the cartels are, they've got some stuff going on for themselves as well. So this means we get mass death and chaos, which outweighs meaningfully all political consequences, because I think people will be a lot sadder about mass death and chaos than they will, for instance, about OO's claims, which are like, you're dependent on the US. That's not very nice. I think those just don't weigh up against what we've said. On top of this, I want to give you another very important political piece of context here, which is that Sheinbaum has repeatedly rejected the US's offer to invade Mexico with US troops. This would be actively backtracking on your own stated policy. Let's also remember Sheinbaum is an incredibly popular political leader, which means her stances have historically been popular, which means we are now reneging on a popular stance. That is an actively stupid, suicidal own goal. I also want to note to symmetrize, do not allow the violence point to be symmetrized by the claim that, well, cartels are also doing violence. The violence that cartels are doing is restrained by necessity by virtue of the fact that they cannot afford for everything to actively a war zone, because then they have no consumers, they have no supply lines, they've got nothing, they don't thrive in pure chaos. An invasion is pure chaos. I also want to note, developing a point that OO made further, which is about cartel embeddedness. Cartel embeddedness inside the Mexican political social system means there are major parts of governance. This means if you wipe them out, governance also collapses, and there is a general state of anarchy. The reason this is important is because the Americans don't care about the anarchy, right? They care about the fentanyl crisis. So they'll very happily wipe out even the essential middlemen in the cartel, which actually lead to like the governance and the functioning of the police force and the mayors in many of these cities. The Mexicans care, but they're not going to have the ability to stop the Americans restraining them, because the Americans only care about the bottom line, which is fentanyl inside the US. What this means then is that very likely you're going to have chaos, a power vacuum inside many of the areas, which, as you yourself have identified, the Mexican army does not have great inroads into. I want you to think about historical analogs when the US has done this as well. Look at what happened when they just devastated previously existing administrative structures in Iraq. What happened is that all of these groups eventually coalesced and formed ISIS on the basis of strong anti-Americanism. Those are the sorts of consequences which are likely when you go in with the objective of trying to achieve American aims. Your final takeaway should basically just be this: Americans have a long track record of fucking up every intervention they've ever been in. This is one they will feel incredibly powerful, and they're going to do it again. That impact outweighs everything in this debate. For those reasons, very proud to oppose.
I thank Member of Opposition for that fine speech, and I call upon Government Whip to close off top bench.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. CO missed her point. Her point isn't that this is the best way to deal with drugs cartels necessarily, but it is the best way to be seen as dealing with those in the first place. We think that even if we buy their whole case about how the left isn't in danger there, we think that specifically Sheinbaum is in danger where we are talking, and we don't want her opponents from the center, he called it center left, but okay, and other members of the left, and we think that overall we should prefer her. Note that the right wing, even if it's not as popular in Mexico, we aren't relying on that, both for making sure that she is the one that stays in power and manages to do her own policies, and as long as the cartel problem is a big problem and something that political opponents can fight with, this is important. But secondly, on all levels, this is important, right? The police is one of the most important tools dealing with cartels, especially if we are talking about actually fighting them inside the cities and making sure that civilians aren't harmed and we can get them to jail and so on. We think that to make sure that in the different areas in Mexico, the different cities and states and so on, they have people that are loyal to Sheinbaum and more likely to lean to her own policies, means that the way to show that is by Sheinbaum being popular and thinking that this problem is overall solved so they can deal with the other problems that are more popular overall. We think that this makes her case extremely relevant in this debate. We think that we should note that even if one side convince you that their fighting cartels is more effective or done well, we should still go with CG. Why? On the same metrics, right? To make sure that we keep fighting cartels with the control where a left-wing government does it. Even if the US is bad, a right-wing government or somebody else coming in the States or Central or anyone else, we think it's just, or coming in and going hard on crime, we think it's just much worse. We think that neither Mexico nor the USA will manage to get rid of cartels completely, right? Corruption means that some cartels are sought after while some aren't. either side if OG say that Mexico will keep control about what the USA does, right? Some of the cartels are really strong, like OO tell us, and even the USA would rather not lose soldiers there because it's extremely unpopular inside the Republican Party to do that. That means that the USA won't take many risks, but will also probably leave after Trump. This means that in order to make long-term change, according to Sheinbaum's ideology on cartels, meaning keeping the leftist agenda of her own and not breaching things like privacy, not risking civilian lives, can happen only if she knows she is the one that is still in power and then done the big thing against cartel that everyone else is warning about. But this also allows to keep the ideology on other things, right? Which are less important than dealing with cartels and an even vote inside the leftist party, if it's indeed true that someone else from the left will come in, right? Things like economy and housing, things like street violence and education, police and poverty, we think those affect all Mexicans and a lot of the time affect them much more than the cartels themselves, making sure that they live a comfortable life, that they aren't in danger from a not working health system, and so on. What this allows is dealing with the cartels without losing power, right? It's better than cracking down yourself if that's what CO claims that is currently happening. Not because you can blame Trump, like OG says, because this is really weird, right? Like you let him in and done that stuff, but because not agreeing will definitely be worse, right? That is when you look soft on crime, no matter what else you actually did and no matter what else you did to fight those cartels, because you didn't let the USA in, you didn't let the big thing to actually come into power and do those things. We think that that is a very strong weapon that will be used again and again. We think that this at least allows Sheinbaum to actually have more control over her own party and make sure that she can do other policies overall. But note, 1 second. All the ideas about OO and CO tell us, oh, what about popularity on like, oh, say, oh, you look like a pussy succumbing to Trump, the same one who put tariffs and stopped immigration and so on. Sure, but two answers to that. First, we think this happens now, not in the 3 years' time, meaning that the surrender isn't seen as much as actually something that will still be attacked against her in 3 years, that she went soft on cartels and so on, and not, oh, maybe she succumbed to Trump 3 years ago. But secondly, and this is also better than OG's mechanism about how maybe going with Trump will mean less tariffs overall and so on, we think that the cartels had been for years the big problem that Mexico actually faces and is historically something that is seen as very bad. We think that that means that it's very important to make sure that we show we are doing the most towards those goals in order to win. Now, OO and CO both have a case about how this will be really bad and really harmful to the Mexicans because Americans are crazy and racist and so on. Note that in terms of capacity, the American military has much better ability to actually be more accurate, to be much better in dealing with them in the first place, and doing the assassinations and other things secretly and not hurting other widespread populations. Or say, this isn't effective. This isn't true because we think that the leaders and so on do have a lot of the information and so on that could be helpful for the cartel itself. They do have the communications and the power and the like talks with the government members and so on. And yes, all of the time taking away the leader is something that disrupts completely the entire organization. But we think that also this is just isn't comparative because we think that the Mexican police is as crazy and doesn't care about the lives as well, while also not having the capacity. Before I continue, I'll take first.
Trump has a strong desire for quick results, which means the higher amount of casualties are in the conflict, the more it can sell it as a political victory because it increases the possibility that many of those people were potential cartel members. So they don't care about accuracy, but about total numbers.
Trump also cares about not endangering his own troops too much and not leading them to actually go to the worst places overall. We think that he needs just to show that he got some things and so on. This is enough by maybe cutting off the cartel leaders and so on. And we think that it's also likely that in the first place, the USA will not go over all the cartels. They will just go over the ones in the border and so on. We think this makes it that the main impact and the main thing that happens is whether or not it seems like Claudia is the one that is doing the most and not surrendered something that could have been very, very helpful. But we think that, again, like I said, it's not comparative that the USA is assholes and the army is really bad. We think that the Mexican police is just as racist against certain types of groups, is just as corrupt and actually hurtful, and is less actually supervised and seen after that it's done things correctly and well. We think that for all of those reasons, because it means that Sheinbaum can do her other policies for more time and for better, and on all states, for all of those reasons, take us.
I thank Gov Whip for that fine speech, and I call upon the opposition whip to close off opposition bench and the debate as a whole. Here.
Hello, hello. Audible, visible?
Yes to both.
Okay. Government whip says the line that the US political sphere, even the Republicans, care overwhelmingly about how US soldiers do in this war, whether or not they will die, whether or not they will suffer. We agree with closing government, and that is what unlocks the House analysis and proves to you that the US in this entire crisis is going to care much more about its own soldier, about how it's dealing with the issue, as opposed to thinking about the consequences it causes within Mexico. Stuff government whip chooses to absolutely not engage with, right? The reason why this is extremely powerful analysis in this match is because opening opposition does the cute thing and says, listen, if you just let people in, you'll be unpopular. The issue is if the policy works out, then like you'll probably become popular over time because you got something done, right? It is Taha's exclusive analysis that shows you that US soldiers entering this situation aren't just going to make the crisis itself worse, but are going to make many, many other avenues of life significantly much worse for Mexican people, which is what makes the unpopularity argument much more stronger. Because now, A, not only will the policy not work, but you will become unpopular for letting them cause the consequences you have caused in the status quo. I want to note closing government's big argument over here is you're going to appear extremely weak if you don't do anything about the cartels. This is disproven by two layers of analysis. One, Taha told you why we are successfully right now dealing with these cartels and progress is being made. This is shown by like the decreased fentanyl overdose cases, but also the amount of like cartel leaders we are consistently extraditing to the US right now. But two, and more importantly, you're going to appear much, much more weaker if you let Trump dictate the way you conduct your policies. This is extremely more potent in this context because within Mexico, the big narrative is that Trump is extremely evil. So the most unpopular thing you can do is cover down to Trump, which is to say that your popularity is lost not just because you're not doing anything about the cartels. Because notice, if that were the case, Sheinbaum wouldn't have come into power in the first place, right? The idea is people are willing to ignore that issue because they see it as an ever-present issue within the Mexican political economic sphere. They don't particularly blame Sheinbaum for causing this issue or being the singular like changer over here. What they will blame you for is letting US army soldiers onto the ground and significantly making things much worse than you have right now. You're not only going to appear weak, but what you're going to do is, if you buy Taha's analysis that these US soldiers are going to be causing a lot of death, you are going to be seen as the leader who let foreigners come in and kill your own people. This is the point at which people develop sympathies for existing ground forces like the cartel organization. I want you to think of the analogy here, right? The US going into these places has always caused rise of terrorism, etc. Why does this happen? Because the US causes the amount of like chaos, sexual violence, like assault, all of those things on the ground, which creates sympathies for people for the movements that are being attacked against the foreigners. This is why movements like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or Taliban in the Afghanistan consistently keep getting support, because those people view the US as the primary destroyer of their lives as opposed to the cartels. Why is this so important? Because Taha's analysis of how he explains cartels operation in the Mexican system is what is unlocking all of this. Because unlike like how all of GovBench like does very naive analysis, they paint all of Mexico as like this war zone where people are escaping bullets as they make their way to work. That's not how countries operate, right? The vast majority of places in Mexico exist side by side with cartels presence, in the sense that cartels literally help in the governance and administration and running of these places. Sure, not in partnership with the government, but very often if you need to get a road fixed in an area or you need business operating in an area, you need very strong working relationships with the cartels that exist in those regions. The problem is once you start draining chaos and start bringing war into those everyday lives, one, you remove all of the working relationship you had with cartels, so those cartels now hold your entire population hostage and can cause all of the damages over there, which makes you seem super unpopular because people care much more about them dying than they care about, did Sheinbaum really mean to like cause them to kill us? But two, and more importantly, the fact that your working relationship with them breaks down directly deals with the idea that you aren't able to do any of your other leftist policies, or you aren't able to make the government function because you need to have that working relationship with cartels in order to implement all of your other leftist policies like soup kitchens, like cash handouts, like direct, like reaching out to grassroots levels. All of this, when it becomes much worse, is when you lose much more popularity than what closing government wants to take. Last idea on closing government, which is that the right-wing government keeps winning. I'm going to just drop through facts over here. Lopez Obrador, the direct predecessor of like our current Sheinbaum lady, was in power from 2018 to 2024. After him, a women Jewish lady in an overwhelming Catholic country got voted by the most overwhelming majority. We know, by the way, in the current world, she is the most popular leader in the current world right now, democratic countries, mein. Which is why it's so important for you to like discount all of their fault analysis, that there's just this secret right wing that exists. Because even if she loses power, or even if she loses popularity, the way that votes are split up in Mexico aren't that it will go to other right wing governments, are that it will go to some other leader within her own party who has been winning for the last 30 years. So like analysis, if you want to flip that one up. Before I move on, opening government.
So why is it then that if the US is going to ignore you once they enter the country, they wouldn't just invade otherwise and ignore your sovereignty there?
So this has three big responses. Number one, if it is indeed the case that the only reason you're letting Trump in because you're afraid he'll invade you anyways otherwise, then it's a big popularity dump for you, because everyone's going to know you covered to Trump. Number two, the first time you do this isn't going to be the last time you do this. So once you let Trump in, you're consistently going to be in positions where you'll repeatedly get in these standoffs against Trump. Number three, we think even if you don't back down, we don't buy like their assertion that Trump is just going to invade you, for three big reasons. Number one, Trump is quite busy with like a lot of crisis, etc. on his hands, right? Trump isn't going to find the popularity to be able to just go and invade another country or the money for it. Number two, very importantly, Trump is not consistent with his threats, right? He's threatened a lot of things to the world right now, including that he'll buy or invade Greenland and Denmark and he'll attack all of those countries, or that he'll fuck over Canada. I see no reason to believe that Trump is going to actually do any of this. They're, especially given the political context right now, especially on tariffs, which I want to attack OG the most on, because tariffs has been put, removed, and now are potentially, yes, right now on Brazil, but could just go in the next week. The idea is whether or not you say yes to Trump right now does nothing to deal with his mood next week. Because sure, right now his issue is like the fentanyl crisis, but last week he wanted to put tariffs on everybody regardless of whatever their actions was. So if your big thing is we want to avoid tariffs, we think this gives you absolutely no assurance to do so. But the third and most crucial response I have over here, if indeed it is the case that you have absolutely no bargaining power and that Trump will be able to do anything that he wants you to do, then OG's entire case, which depends on the idea that you're going to have a working relationship with the US Army over here, falls apart. Because once again, the US isn't interested in fixing the cartel issue for Mexico. They're interested in fixing the OD cases that are happening into the US. To the extent at which the US just wants to solve their own problems, they will not care about partnership with you and they'll just keep fucking you over, right? This is going to be especially harmful because the US mistrusts both the Mexican government, but also like everyone that exists on the ground. I want you to note, this is quite equivalent to how the IDF treats like everything in Gaza, right? The moment at which you walk into a zone thinking everyone over here is a potential enemy and a potential threatener to me, you no longer care about like differentiating between civilians and attackers. You will literally just attack anyone else you can. Their idea that the US has better technology is irrelevant because the problem isn't that you don't have enough firearm to overwhelm the cartels. Mexican army has better firearms than the other side do. The issue is that it's extremely difficult to have the intelligence which gets you to like the ringleaders, etc. The point at which OG's analysis is we'll be providing intelligence. What's the benefit? So proud to oppose.